It is an honor and a joy for me to welcome you, dear guests, in the opening ceremony of the first commercial CO2 removal facility. May I ask you to please be seated? You may ask yourself why an Olympic snowboard champion is presenting this historical event. I would like to share an explanation and a little anecdote with you that actually emphasizes a very special characteristics of the two Climeworks founders. At the Swiss Economic Forum in 2011, I had the privilege of seeing these two young men, the founders of Climeworks, how they were presenting their vision in front of big business figures. And what truly fascinated me at that time was not the way of presenting their vision, neither was it the long hair or the beautiful suits that they probably hadn't worn for a decade. No, it was much more the passion and this certainty, this conviction of reaching this target that almost seemed impossible and a little bit crazy in my eyes. And these characteristics and this fire and the commitment to achieve big goals that seem to be almost impossible against all odds. This behavior I had already known, but only from my own world, which is the competitive sports. This led me to my personal involvement. I gave them my personal details and I asked them to please let me be a partaker in this project. So we established a relationship and a connection, and sometimes we met each other on the bike or in the Climework office that was constantly growing. We've had many inspiring conversations. On the one hand about the set targets, failures, and the will of never giving up, the stamina, and the very strong need and desire of moving big things. We had very similar topics, but my goals of reaching Olympic goals seemed to me so small compared to their big plans of filtering CO2 from the ambient air. These two boys, as I call them, really make everything possible and do everything to keep their promise and their word. In year 2011, they presented their vision, which was to move CO2 from the ambient air and supply this CO2 to a customer. They explicitly talked about a greenhouse. Later on, they made a side note saying, when we're going to open this plant, you're going to be the presenter. And I thought, well, let's see. But today, indeed, we are here. And together we have the privilege to inaugurate this vision that has come true for the very first time worldwide. It's a huge joy and a big honor for me to welcome Jan Wurzelbacher and Christoph Gewald on stage in a few moments, and especially after this little introduction that shows how their work is going on, and then to welcome them with a big hand. Let's watch the movie.
In order to achieve the 2-degree global warming target, from 2050 on, more than 10 gigatons of CO2 need to be removed from the atmosphere every year. Climeworks is the worldwide first company that is commercially capturing CO2 from ambient air.
The Climeworks technology is based on a cyclic, so-called adsorption-desorption process. The heart of our technology is a novel filter material which specifically captures the CO2 on its surface once it's in contact with ambient air. With our technology, we're able to produce high-purity CO2 from atmospheric concentration in only one step.
CO2 can be sold on the merchant market for the food and beverage industry. CO2 can be used for the production of synthetic renewable fuels and materials. And CO2 can be extracted from the atmosphere and stored underground to create negative emissions and reduce the CO2 content of the atmosphere. We have put together a strong complementary mix of expertise in engineering, in chemistry, in business development, and in finance.
We can build commercial plants going down to 50 tons of CO2 per year, up to 100,000 or even 1 million tons of CO2 per year. In our current assembly line, we can produce up to 150 CO2 collectors per year, which is the equivalent of 7,500 tons of CO2. Climeworks is building the worldwide first commercial direct air capture plant. It's the first one to serve CO2 to a customer.
The plant will be located next to a greenhouse here in the vicinity of Zurich, and we will supply the CO2 to the greenhouse operator that will fertilize the plants because they grow better when there's a lot of CO2 around. The plant also sits next to a waste incineration plant directly next door, and from this plant we obtain heat and electricity to run our facility. The plant will deliver around 900 tons of CO2 per year to the greenhouse, which is supposed to increase the crop yield by around 20 to 30%. We always had this big vision of building up technology that could impact one of the biggest challenges humanity ever faced, which is climate change.
I think the most exciting part about the work we have been doing over the last 8 years at Climeworks is to see a scale-up from laboratory, which is several milliliters of CO2 per day, to reach commercial scale this year, where we produce 900 tons of CO2 per year.
It is our vision to capture 1% of global CO2 emissions in 2025. To capture 1% of global emissions, we would need to install around 750,000 shipping containers filled with CO2 collectors. And this is the amount of shipping containers that pass through Shanghai Harbor in 2 weeks. This is something that global economy can manage.
Sehr geehrter Herr Ständerat Noser, sehr geehrter Herr Regierungsrat Stocker, dear Climeworkers, dear Climeworks customers, shareholders and partners, dear speakers and dear guests, I'm very happy that you made it here today to celebrate with us the launch of our worldwide first commercial plant, taking CO2 out of the air and supplying it to a customer. I brought something here. This is the size of the filter that we used when we first captured CO2 from the air back in 2008 in the laboratories of Aldo Steinfeld at ETH Zurich, using the material of the lab of Tanja Zimmermann at EMPA. And with this one, we captured several milligrams of CO2 per day from the air. This was also a time where the general feasibility of CO2 capture from the air was questioned or doubted, and if people were thinking of actually doing that, numbers were thrown around that this would cost many, many hundreds or even thousands of dollars per ton of CO2, even in the long term. This was also the time where the discussion was rather an either-or. Should we either take CO2 out of the air or do other things like switching from fossil to renewables? And this was also a time where the two of us did not really have a good idea of what it needed to put something like this plant that we are starting today into operation. Fritz and Markus Meyer, owners and operators of this greenhouse, they will well remember the two of us. visiting them back in 2008, and we said, we are going to put this plant in place, getting all your CO2, and we'll do this in 2010. Well, very latest in 2011. Today, 8 years later, we have put up a plant that takes 900 tons of CO2 out of the air every year. We are confident that based on the projected lifetime of our plant, with this very first-of-a-kind plant, with a very small-scale plant, not comparable to industrial large-scale deployment, we can do this for something around $600 or Swiss francs per ton, and we know what we are going to do to cut this by a factor of 3. So this is something we are quite proud of. And this is also a time where 7 Climeworks plants will be deployed in the next 24 months, serving CO2 from the atmosphere for the production of renewable fuels or materials. This is the time where, based on the Paris Climate Agreement, it is agreed that by mid of the century, not only all means have to be accomplished to reduce fossils and do everything we can to switch to renewable energy, but that on top of that, we need to remove 5 to 10 billion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere every year in order to have a chance to reach the 2-degree global warming target. And finally, today is also the day where we are very happy to announce already the next step, that towards the end of this year, we will be installing the first Climeworks plant up in Iceland that will take out CO2 from the air and store it underground in order to permanently remove it from the atmosphere. So this has been quite a long way we've been walking over the last 8 years.
Well, talking about going long path, exactly 10 years ago, I climbed and skied the coldest mountain on Earth, Mount McKinley in Alaska. And actually, starting a business and growing a business in the field of CO2 capture from air. Should I restart? Starting a business in the field of CO2 capture from air feels very much like an expedition. And today, we are eventually reaching an important milestone. Maybe we are reaching base camp, thanks to the help of great people and companies around us. I would like to thank all 45 Climeworkers and our board of directors for dedicating their time to our vision. I would like to thank our shareholders and investors for their continued and great support in our very long-term project. I would like to thank Professor Aldo Steinfeld of ETH Zurich for initially starting the research on CO2 capture from air, who together with EMPA provided the scientific background for what we're doing. Only 1 year after Jan and I began our research on CO2 capture from air, we already started Climeworks, and this was only made possible by Bea Chilik's great initiative VentureKick, by support from Gebert Rüff Foundation, and by support of the Swiss Federal Office of the Energy, who ultimately made this project here possible. Very importantly, we would also like to thank our customers for their trust and for helping us to commercialize CO2 capture from the air. In particular, thank car maker Audi, who joined forces with us already back in 2013. And I would like to thank the project partners of this project here, like the CEO of the nearby or next door waste incineration plant, Daniel Böhni, and the owners and operators of this greenhouse, Markus and Fritz Meyer. So let's together enjoy some moments in base camp today, but the way ahead of us will be very challenging, and we are inviting all of you to join us on this path to ultimately make CO2 capture from the air a success. Thank you all for being here.
As we just heard, it is and it has been a long way, and on this way, an essential puzzle part was the ETH, or still is. And I'm going to talk about a quotation by a man that said, a good university doesn't only teach knowledge, but the ability to think right. These words come from a person that has really made an investment that the thinking part is not all there is, but that it can be put into practice. And even though he's very busy, he has always been willing to support our two founders whenever they needed him and to accompany them. The original mechanic engineer was working with Sulzer and Hilti in the field of research and development. Let's welcome Professor Dr. Lino Guzzello from the ETH Zurich. Many thanks for this warm welcome and introduction.
It was really important to me to be here today, to personally congratulate you two for the incredible success that you have achieved so far, and to encourage you and everybody else in this room to keep on going. We are not talking here about the nice to have thing. We are talking here about something that humanity needs to solve, a problem that humanity needs to solve. And I believe that these two people and all their colleagues in Climeworks have not the solution, but an important element of the solution to this problem. ETH, most of you will know it. Those who don't, I would like to take the few minutes to introduce it to you. You see here the couple of the most important figures, but probably the most important mission I want to explain to you is to bring in the global most advanced cutting-edge research results to Switzerland, such that in Switzerland companies like Climeworks can be created. Such that two people such as Jan Wurzbacher and Christoph Gebald can be educated with the latest available scientific results, such that they can then come together with the supervisor Aldo Steinfeld, other people from the mechanical engineering department, Marco Mazzotti is here today, EMPA, and all other who have contributed to come up with really, truly innovative solution that can help this planet to solve its problems. ETH's main strategic areas are in the back. You see in the middle is energy, resources, climate change. That's why we are here today. I'm very grateful that you mentioned the fact that we do not just convey basic science, basic engineering, but we also want our people to become critical thinkers and entrepreneurial actors. And I think Climeworks is a fantastic example of what this education can bring to Switzerland, but also to the globe. We create now, on the average, 25 new spin-off companies every year. Every second week, a new spin-off company is created from ETH. And these companies, which we count here, are companies that use IP generated at ETH. So we do not just count any company created by an ETH alumni. We count only those companies who rely on basic science and basic engineering results that have been made at ETH. And Climeworks is a prime example of that. 2009, the big year, huh? I remember I was a professor in mechanical engineering at that time, and there were these two cute little, not little, but young PhD students in the hallways walking around, and I started talking to them, and then they explained that idea, and I immediately saw that there is a spark behind this idea, and I thought this someday will become something bigger than just a PhD thesis. The PhD thesis eventually then arrived, finally. And after the PhD thesis, this rocket took off that we are facing all today. You know, it's always easy, or it's simple to say that you're doing good things. Maybe you're even right, but the final proof of the pudding comes not by eating it in this case, but by having other people citing you. And what you see here on my right side, this blue cover here, is the mechanical engineering. That's the kind of the boulevard journal of the mechanical engineering community. And in this very important magazine, in the last issue, the last but one issue, there was a big article about Climeworks, about your works. Compliments for that. Many other very important news sources have made important reports about Climeworks. The world is seeing what you guys are doing here. The world is looking at what we are doing here, and this is the world's first plant where CO2 is captured commercially from the air. I remember another first in Switzerland. In Bir, there is the world's first commercial gas turbine, 1933. It's now an ASME landmark. I won't be here on this planet anymore, most probably. But I bet you, at some time, ASME, the American Society of Mechanical Engineering, will make this an engineering landmark for being the first commercial plant on the world that has captured CO2 from the air. I'm truly convinced that we are here witnessing a historic moment, ladies and gentlemen. And this historic moment has been made possible by 2 graduates of ETH. And therefore, I'm very grateful that you all support, of course, ETH so much. We do not just work with Climeworks. You see here a couple of other ideas that we have. I want to mention the Innovation Park in Dübendorf. There is a lot of space there. You could deploy thousands of your machines. So if you're looking for some spaces and you find the investors, I'm sure that Senator Noser and other people will make sure that you will find also a space there in Dübendorf. Let me conclude. I'm extremely proud of you two. You are model graduates, model alumni of ETH. Thank you very much for what you did. All the best for your future and for Climeworks. I'm extremely glad that I had the pleasure and the privilege to be a little bit accompanying your path. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gutzella, you said that you are enormously proud of these 2 young gentlemen. From the point of view of the ETH, what was the positive impact by the spin-off Climeworks? Can I say that had enormous visibility on an international scale? You saw that the ETH really is seen globally as an international leading university in the field of the research, and we can really show results. If the ETH is known on a worldwide scale, we can attract even more talented geniuses and researchers and professors from all around the world. Secondly, these projects will also motivate young people in Switzerland to start their studies in the University of the ETH Zurich. We need people, the most intelligent young possible students should not become skiers or ski champions. They should go and start their studies at the ETH. Well, that's why I'm also very joyful and happy to be part of this whole project. You as a mentor and coach that has accompanied these 2 young gentlemen, what would be the advice that you would like to give them? Well, that's a very spontaneous question. I would say that they should really keep their pioneering spirit and their passion. Well, we always have something for the speakers. Mr. Gutzella, you have to receive a special gift. There is 1 bottle of wine and a beautiful flourishing basket of vegetables, of course, from this greenhouse where we're in. Whenever spin-offs are founded and technologies are developed in the laboratories, we need commercial products that can demonstrate that these technologies truly work and show results in practice. And the Federal Office of Energy has played a key role in the history of Climeworks. Dr. Yasmin Kalisesi was the director of the pilot and demonstrational programs of the Federal Office of Energy, and she has played a key factor when it comes to the authorization and permission of this project. Let's give her a warm hand, Dr. Yasmin Kalisesi. Ich kann es, well, let's do it in German. I'm a citizen of Switzerland, distinguished senior civil servant, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to inaugurate together with you the first commercial DAC plant. I am very proud as a representative of the BFE to support the work of Climeworks since 2014. You may ask yourself why the BFE, the Federal Office of Energy, supports this project. Well, the most important deployment is the filtering of CO2 and the providing of these for the production of renewable energy. And this allows us to store and develop new sustainable renewable energies and materials. The CO2 that is filtered from the air is delivered to the Maya brothers that can be used as future fuels. Today's plant that we're opening serves for the demonstration of this technology, and the profitability of this plant is shown and measured in a real example here. Now, based on the demonstrational plant, further plants shall be established. For this we are here. It is the task of the Federal Office of Energy to support such projects that develop these kind of technologies. Besides the importance of this plant, we have seen that a development has been established to really supply CO2 to a customer. Mr. Stocker was the expert when I was doing my dissertation, and I was really I was studying the ozonal layer. So 30 years ago, in 1987, the Montreal Protocol was accepted, signed by 197 parties. On 1st of January 1989, it came into force, and the target was to reduce the CFC that would destroy the ozone layers. It was the first agreement signed in the history of the United Nations, and Kofi Annan said later on that the Montreal Protocol was the most successful international agreement up to those times. However, there are two interesting aspects that we can emphasize. The first of it is that the first scientific basis of the protocol was the measurement of CFC in the atmosphere in the polar regions was only made in the 1970s, so it only took 15 years until politicians and scientists came to an agreement that and how they had to act. The second important aspect is that only a few companies were actually concerned by the agreement. In the Western countries, we are talking about 11 companies. The rest of them came from China and Russia. The implementing of these protocols happened quickly. It was actually even an easy and simple task, but still, the ozone layer took decades until we could really see a recovery and an improvement, and somehow approached our target. Also, talking about the climatic discussions, we see that we still have a long way to go. Dear ladies and gentlemen, on the political level, these targets are not always easy to achieve. But important doors have been opened, and today's inauguration is the proof that more and more we have taken the important steps and are going to the right direction. Many thanks to Climeworks and the brothers from the Bayer family and also the waste incineration plant. I wish you a lot of success in the launching of this project. And all of you, dear ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy. Ms. Galisesi, many thanks. From the point of view of the Office of Energy, the supplying of CO2, respectively the synthetic production of renewable fuels, is very important. What other steps can be taken? Can you give us some visionary look out? The idea is that the CO2 that is removed and produced from this plant is to use it for the production of synthetic fuels. It's a long way to go, but some projects are already running towards this goal. Well, thank you. We're going to see, and we are curious. You have already gone some way with these two gentlemen. What has fascinated you the most on this path? Well, I have to say that already at the age of 25, it was hardly understandable for me that men can influence the worldly global climate. And now, at the age of 45, it still seems fascinating to me that we have the power to influence the climate and that we can really initiate projects that will reverse the climatic changes. It takes a lot of boldness. You are right, I think that's a good quote. And we wish these two gentlemen a lot of boldness and audacity in their future paths. Thank you also to you, Mrs. Galisesi. We have a gift for you, Mrs. Galisesi. Thank you very much. A basket full of vegetables. We heard what is important from the point of view of the Federal Office of Energy, but if we open the field a little bit more and ask ourselves what the Climeworks technology has and what they have to do, we're not going to ask anyone else but the leading international researcher. He was the leading author of the IPCC, and nowadays he's working as a professor at the University of Bern. Let's welcome Dr. Professor Thomas Stocker with a big hand. Dear ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome from my side. I also want to welcome the Climeworks founders and the whole team. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here today because on 31st of May of 2017, if I wasn't here, I would probably have fallen into my worst depression ever. Some ladies and gentlemen among you also are part of the species of those who regularly look at their cell phones. And today Donald Trump declared that he would like to take a step back from the Paris Agreement. I don't think that this date was actually foreseen. I don't think that they had planned it in ahead to do that on the 31st of May. But it's a joy to me to see what we're doing today because we see that steps are taken and we see that we are able to really influence the climatic changes, and we want to give thanks to these young gentlemen for their big milestone that they have reached. I would like to remind you of three important factors, and I know that these points usually get forgotten. And as we see today, the most important industrialized country of the world announces that the climatic change is one of the minor problems in their view that can be disregarded, that should be subjected to a short-term development in the economy with older technologies. I would like to remind you of three topics. First of all, the climatic change does take place. You see it on my forehead. I'm sweating quite a lot, but the proof is in the measurements, in the research. There are millions of stations all around the world that truly show us that not only the temperatures have been increased by about 1 degree Celsius in the last 150 years. In Switzerland, it's a bit more. It's 1.8 degrees since 1864. But we also see the changes in the ocean that has led to a warming of the oceans all around the world up to a depth of 2 kilometers. So through the CO2 emissions that were caused by the incineration of fossil fuels have increased the temperatures. And if this is the case, there must be other indicators in the climatic system. Indeed, the term of a global warming is actually not well selected because it's not only the climate that changes, everything changes. For example, the ice coverage has decreased by 40% since 1970, the summer months, which is when the Arctic region was really showed really warm temperatures. There are other figures and factors that have changed. Besides the ice coverage in the Arctic, also the sea level has risen, but not because the ice in the Arctic was melting. It's all around the world that it is melting. We see it in the glaciers of the Swiss Alps. We see it through satellite measurements, also in Greenland and other countries, and the footage shows us that indeed planet Earth is slimming down in terms of ice coverage like never before, which has led to a rise of 19 centimeters of the sea level, a fact that no one doubts. Second aspect, we know what is the cause of this climatic change. It's the incineration of the fuel fossils, the activities of the industrialized man and world in general. The concentration of CO2 has increased by 30% in the last 800,000 years. It's what we have clearly proven at the University of Bern based on measurements on ice cores of the Antarctic. It was we could actually measure the CO2 degree in this air. We know that the quantum physicists can calculate the absorption of the molecules in infrared light because it is a greenhouse gas. Another point that I would like to mention, we know where the journey is going. In the 5th climate report of the IPCC that I had the privilege to govern with other colleagues of mine, with thousands have contributed. We stated that the climatic change does take place and that we have to take steps because we know where planet Earth is going if no steps are taken. These were the foundations given in 2013 that led to a consentment of 197 countries that signed the Paris Agreement. In a business as usual scenario, if we continue the way we do, we expect a rise of the temperature of 4 degrees, which would mean that by the end of the 21st century, we would state an increased temperature of about 5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial times, which would mean that in many places of the Earth, there will be conditions where people and ecosystems cannot adjust to anymore. It will involve costs. But we can also talk about an ecosystem such as a greenhouse providing vegetables that we would lose. If certain resources are lost, this is a highly conflictive potential that we have to take into account. But there is another issue. There are other scenarios, the so-called climate protection scenarios. When talking about Climeworks, this is an important aspect. We have set a target of 2 degrees Celsius. We would like to keep the global warming beneath 2 degrees Celsius or even beneath 1.5. It's a very ambitious target that we set, and that's why it needs very innovative scientists and researchers such as the Climeworkers and the founders today, because indeed it takes a lot of development and big steps to achieve this goal by the mid of the 21st century. I would like to also compare this whole development with the base camp and the expedition. Our 2 founders bought the shoes and they started their expedition to the summit, and they proved that they are indeed willing to reach the peak, and so they're on the right way, the way that also the IPCC has begun to motivate and convince the political decision makers. It's now time to find solutions to solve one of these major problems, and we are very proud and glad to initiate one of these important solutions, or at least contributions, the first commercial direct air capture plant in Switzerland. We hope that indeed our 2 founders are reaching their target of filtering 1% of the global CO2 from the air by 2015. We will be very proud of them and we wish them a lot of success. Thank you for your attention. Many thanks, Thomas Stocker. We heard that we're not even in the base camp yet. Well, you've shared a message, and I also had to state that unfortunately not all big figures and relevant representatives on Earth know these important facts, so we need to inform the public. But we're not going to talk about politics today, even though it might be shocking what is happening around the globe. You talked about the vision of capturing 1% of the CO2 emissions all around the globe. It's a huge figure, what we are achieving already, but still, around the globe, compared to the figures that we have to take into account, it's still a small percentage. Well, this is not a silver bullet, of course, it takes a lot more, but this 1%, if we can indeed achieve this goal, which I'm very confident we will, there is the possibility to multiply what we've initiated. Somewhere on this globe, someone had to take the first step to prove that you can drive a car, and nowadays this technology has, of course, been multiplied, and, well, it has contributed to this major problem, of course, of climatic change. But if the demonstration of this ability to multiply these plans is successful, I am sure that we are going to reach this summit. Many thanks, Professor Dr. Friedman. We also have a basket full of vegetables for you. Let's give him a warm hand. Thank you, Professor Dr. Friedman, Professor Dr. Stockter.
The next speaker says about himself, he is a scientist and a practitioner. But he also said that he's committed the last 15 years of his career and life to keeping CO2 out of the air. He was responsible for the carbon capture storage in the Obama administration. And it's really going to be interesting to hear what he's going to tell us. Welcome, Dr. Julio Fieldman, Senior Consultant of the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Entschuldigung. Herzlichen Applaus, Julio Friedman.
The microphone doesn't work anymore. Let me just check with it. No, it's working again. I'm sorry. Well, my Swiss German is very limited, so I am very sorry for this.
Thank you all for being here. I'm really honored to take part in what I truly believe is a historic event. And I mean that in all seriousness. We are here today to do nothing smaller than witness the birth of a new species. A whole new line of technologies are being born on the Earth today, and we are here to witness that and note its importance. It's not a coincidence that this is happening now. There is, in fact, no better time to undertake the ambitious effort that Jan and Christoph did, which is to pull carbon dioxide out of the air and oceans. There's no better time to do that than now. Carbon removal is now an obvious and urgent thing for human beings to do, and we must grab the initiative and take on negative emissions as part of the work of our species. Part of the reason its time is so good now has already been mentioned. The Paris Agreement makes it clear that all markets everywhere in the world now consider carbon dioxide as part of their priorities. There is no country one can go to where the companies and the leadership and the people do not believe this is an important thing to do. Second of all, the technology has matured a great deal. This has gone from very, very small milliliters of CO2 per day now to a place where there are more than one company trying this. There are 3 or 4 companies around the world doing it. And it is in part because of their technical excellence, in part because of their operational excellence, and in part because of their ambition and drive that Climeworks happens to be the first commercial plant. But we look forward to seeing more and more of these because the technology around the world has matured. In addition to that, the markets have matured as well. By this I mean, overall, the global energy and capital and financial systems have begun to understand that managing carbon is part of their work as well. This point was driven home last year by Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, who said, in fact, that the financial resources of the world are grounded in carbon-based assets, and that, in fact, all financial markets have to grapple with this fact as they go about their work. Increasingly, this is becoming common knowledge and commonplace. We now have shareholders in the United States who have made the first oil company, Occidental, now lay out their climate strategy. And there are going to be many more of these sorts of shareholder efforts to follow. The last point, of course, is pretty obvious. I don't think about this as 410 parts per million of CO2, what I see is that humans have added 2 trillion tons of carbon dioxide to the air. And half of that has gone into the ocean. And it's our job to clean up our room. It's just that simple. We've made a mess. We have to clean it up. And in order to do that, we have to use every tool at our disposal. We have to do efficiency. We have to do renewable energy. We need to do advanced nuclear energy. We need to do carbon capture and storage. But what is obvious now, with the firm commitments in Paris of a 2-degree stabilization scenario and the ambition to do well below 2 degrees, the carbon removal is essential to hit those goals. In fact, direct air capture, which is what this plant does, is now critical to the planet's health. According to the Paris targets, we need to begin deploying at a commercial scale thousands of these plants by 2030. And in fact, by 2050, we need to be pulling 10 billion tons of CO2 out of the air every year. 10 billion tons is 20 times the weight of all the people on Earth. It's a very large number. 10 billion tons is the weight of the mass of the entire oil and gas industry. We have to have an industry as big as that within 25 or 30 years simply to manage the load. It's important to know that this technology is also robust. Although we're seeing its first commercial deployment, of course, we've known for years that we could pull carbon dioxide out of the air. We've been doing it in submarines and U-boats. We've been doing it in spacecraft for 30 or 40 years. In fact, my family just watched Apollo 13 last weekend, and they had to make a direct air capture device on their spacecraft. So we've known that it could be done. Now it's the question is of the urgency, and it's a question of the cost, and it's a question of the value that it provides. And one of the important values that direct air capture provides, and this plant is witness to it today, you can do it anywhere. You can do direct air capture any place. You can do it on your roof. You can do it in Antarctica. You can do it in Iceland, or in Abu Dhabi, or in the Falkland Islands. And any place that has a good renewable resource where you can get cheap renewable energy is a place where you should be thinking about doing direct air capture. And so the market for this is actually very large, and the opportunities are very large. Right now, around the world, today, operating, there are 16 large-scale projects which do carbon capture and storage. Some of them are from industrial plants, some of them are from power plants, but in fact, today we are injecting 22 million tons of carbon dioxide a year underground just to keep it out of the air. And by the end of this decade, in 2020, we will be injecting 40 million tons of CO2 underground every year. That's a good number, but 40 million tons a year is only 10% of what Jan and Christoph have committed themselves to. They've committed to a number that's 10 times bigger than what we have on the books for all carbon capture and storage everywhere in the world. So we got places to go. We got to go fast. We got a lot of work to do, a lot of customers to find, and a lot of investments to make. This is good news, actually. The fact that we have these large projects out there in the world today means every one of those wells, which is currently being monitored, where the costs for drilling and compression have already been paid, is a potential site to deploy direct air capture technology. And I look forward to seeing many more of these projects beginning as Climeworks begins to talk to those operators to get their projects rolling forward. As I said before, Climeworks really has given birth to a new species today. This doesn't happen every day. It's important to mark this event because it's so audacious and so new and so big. Part of the reason I am here, though, is because I visited their plant in Zurich back in January, and like everyone has mentioned, I was immediately struck by the fact that they are, in fact, the twin brothers of Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, and comport themselves that way with energy and enthusiasm and creativity. But the reason that I left excited was not because of their energy. The reason I left excited was because of their excellence. They have technical discipline, they have operational discipline, and they had a clear cost reduction strategy. They laid it all out. They said, this is the cost reduction we've had so far, this is what the next round of cost reduction looks like, and what the next round after that looks like. And these are who our partners are, and this is how we will enter the market. And that clarity, that excellence, that precision, that discipline was what I found exciting. Because that means that not only do you have clear paths to cost reduction, it also means that you have clear paths to commercial scale-up. It means you've thought about what the market looks like and how to enter that market, and that's exciting. Because, in fact, their technology is unique in that it delivers food-grade CO2, or almost food-grade CO2 immediately. There's very little purification needed beyond that. So that means they can enter the food and beverage market immediately. They could sell CO2 to beer companies or to Pepsi-Cola, or make dry ice, or sell to greenhouses, for example. These are things which their technology specifically is able to do. As Tanya said at the beginning, I've spent the last 15 years of my career trying to keep carbon dioxide from entering the air. I'm going to spend a very large part of my current and future career trying to pull carbon dioxide out of the air and oceans and turn it into useful products, to turn it into fuels, to plastics, to cement, all these other sort of things. And I believe that the market will put an extra value on CO2 that comes directly from the air as opposed to some other place. And the reason why is because it's ethical, it's obvious, it's important, and it's just simply what we should be doing to clean our room. Now, the unparalleled achievements these two gentlemen have made here at Climeworks have made the next announcement possible, and it was what Jan had mentioned before. Sometime before the end of this year, we have every expectation that in partnership with Reykjavik Energy in Iceland, they're going to put together the world's first negative emissions power plant, in which they will actually be taking CO2 out of the air for fun and profit, and keeping it stored underground forever. I believe that there's a market for that as well. And I think that the opportunity space that that demonstration creates is important, because the very hardest thing to do is to go from 0 to 1. Many people will tell you you can't do something, and as soon as you do it, they say, hey, I want one of those too. And that's where I think Climeworks is going to be coming forward. This project they're doing will be in partnership with the University of Iceland, with the CarbFix project, with Reykjavik Energy, and has in part actually been supported by the European Commission and the European Union. And that underscores, again, the importance of early government money to get these technologies to market. Because the market doesn't always know how to value something like this until it's built. And once it's built, they have a better understanding of that. So, I have the good fortune to be here with Thomas Stocker, one of the great climate actors in the world and one of the most authoritative voices. But I think actually that people who are concerned about the climate need a new motto. They need a new way to think about entering the world. And I think that the new motto should be go negative. And I think the work we should do is to suck it up. We need to pull it out of the air, we need to turn it into useful stuff, and we need to store it underground forever. And I see here today the birth of a new global enterprise, a new carbon economy, which is made possible by these two audacious young men in Switzerland and their partners, the people who work for them, their commercial investors, their commercial partners, and all the people who are here in this room. Now, I said at the beginning that I was actually honored to be here, and I am honored to be here. But that's not the reason I'm here. The reason I'm here is to honor them. Please join me.
This was just wonderful, and before we saw each other here, and you told me not to talk about the actual president. Is that still like this? Because
I think it's hard.
In this situation, I have to mention it. You still can say no, continue.
Yes, well, I think it's hard to think great thoughts when I think about the president. But in point of fact, I was at an extraordinary event in Marrakesh, and that put an important realization in my head at COP22, which is the governments may play an important role about this, but functionally, this is actually the job of everyone else. This is now the job of scientists, of entrepreneurs, of commercial industry. They're the ones who are going to deliver these solutions to the world.
Go negative and suck it up.
Suck it up, baby.
One still question is, maybe not just for me, but because there is this new project coming up, and we don't want to go into that, but in general, if you say go negative, what does it actually mean? Can you give us an example of what it's to help us give an insight of such a what kind of geological conditions, and explaining how exactly maybe with this storage will take place, to give us an understanding about that with this go negative?
Sure. So the CarbFix project is only one example of how to do this, and I think there will soon be many, and it is my sincere hope that, that this will turn out to be true. The power plant in Iceland, the Reykjavik Energy Power Plant, essentially has 0 emissions. They're very small emissions that they come from their geothermal brines, they re-inject underground. And we know that those actually mineralize and turn into rocks. They've done an excellent job monitoring that system. They've put in a whole series of conservative and non-conservative tracers. They've drilled through the rocks and confirmed that the CO2 is being turned into minerals. And they've put in dyes and they've put in radiogenic carbon and all these things to validate that point. In point of fact, though, most places where we store CO2, we know that it works very well already. There are, the Earth's crust is well configured to store CO2 in many places. So whether that's in Edmonton at the Quest project by Shell, or in Abu Dhabi at the Al Rayada project, or in central Illinois at the Decatur project with Archer Daniels Midland, in those cases it's an oil field in reverse. The rocks trap the CO2 as a buoyant fluid the same way that they would trap oil fields. And in fact, old oil fields are a good place to store the CO2 that you can pull from the air. So if you start at a baseline of 0, and then you begin to pull out of the air, that's how you go negative. That's how you suck it up. And the good news is that there are actually many sites around the world to do exactly that.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for that. I think that helped a lot, but still, I would kind of know how exactly where in Europe, you mentioned a few different places, where would be, and why is the geological system so good? Does it need to be like hard soil, or what is this?
Right. So there's 3 things that you need. They need to be deep. It must be at least 1 kilometer underground. If it's not 1 kilometer underground, it's not going to work very well. The second is you need a zone which is permeable and porous. So you need to be able to inject the fluids into a space. And then you need a trapping mechanism. You need something that prevents the CO2 from coming back out. In Europe, there are actually many good sites to do this. The Ketzin project in Germany demonstrated that actually just outside of Berlin, there's a perfectly good place to store CO2. The longest-lived carbon storage project is a European project. It's the Schleipner project that Statoil has done in the North Sea. And in fact, the North Sea is an excellent place to store very large volumes of CO2, and the European Commission is looking very seriously at that. Total, the French oil company, did a fairly large project. They injected about 100,000 tons of CO2 beneath the city of Lacq, and basically put it in a depleted gas field. So they pulled out the gas first, they put the CO2 back in. And these kinds of systems are actually in many places in Europe and in many places around the world. It is my sincere hope that with this kind of opportunity that Climeworks puts forward, that many other groups within Europe and around the world would see an opportunity to try to think about how to actually use the natural resources that are abundant in Europe and elsewhere for the purpose of making the world better.
Thanks a lot. The last question, you're talking about to a lot of Swiss people. What about the safety? You know, Swiss people are always concerned about safety. Safety with this go negative. Is it possible to take a short answer to that? Safety with go negative?
Yeah, so this is a question which I've answered the same way for about 20 years now, which is, again, the Earth's crust has mass and it has strength. It's not easy to move 1 kilometer of the Earth's crust. I've tried. It's actually very hard. There are naturally occurring CO2 domes all over the world. There's Vichy and Perrier, in fact, are naturally occurring CO2 accumulations that are very large. And as long as you have a good sealing mechanism, in fact, it turns out that CO2 makes those rocks even better. And over time, the CO2 dissolves. Over time, the CO2 turns into minerals where it is fixed permanently. It eventually is true that you need plate tectonics in order to get the CO2 back out. You need to exhume the rocks with collision between continents. It is, in fact, remarkably safe and assured. And we have now been injecting 55 million tons a year for enhanced oil recovery. We've been injecting 22 million tons a year for carbon storage. We've been doing this for since 1972. For 45 years we've been injecting CO2. The number of people who have been harmed or killed or impaired during this entire enterprise are 0. There have been 0 harm, 0 problems. There's been 1 leak, only 1 leak. It was closed in 2 weeks. So we know a lot about this.
I think we're just going to trust Julio Friedman. Give a big applause and thanks a lot for being here for us this day.
Thank you. Dankeschön. Yes,
Nun ist-
exactly. Ich kann es nicht auf der Flugzeug. Nein.
Thank you so much.
Nun ist es soweit.
We have come to the moment. Now it's about the heart of today's event, which is the startup of the facility that we have been talking about all day long. And we are going to do this all together. It is actually a drone placed outside, and we're going to somehow fly with the drone to the waste incineration facility, observing the whole story from above. And the facility shall be started up. And for this, I really need Jan and Christoph here on stage with me, please. So now we are here and we see that the drone is located in front of the greenhouse. The buzzer is ready because the drone will find its way to the facility. We see here some scheme, but I would like to explain that. Jan, can you help us, please? We see two figures here, 392 ppm, that's the CO2 degree of the ambient air. In the middle, we see the symbol of one of the CO2 collectors. And what we're going to do is that we are going to measure the CO2 degree in the air, and in a moment, we turn on the facility, we're going to keep measuring the degree and we'll see what happens with the ambient air. So you see it, the CO2 is sucked in here and released there. Thank you. Now, there is only one thing. Let's get the drone started. From afar, we see the plant. There is the Climeworks facility. Here we see the place where the air is released. We are standing right behind the facility now. Now, once the buzzer is pushed by either Jan or Christoph, the fans will start turning, and in doing so, the first commercial DAC facility worldwide is initiated. Who would like to push the button? I will count to 3. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. We see that it takes a little while. The fans are spinning. We don't see it very well, but we see that the values are already changing here. And I am really excited. It's truly a historical moment, and I'll just stop talking now. There's still quite a way to go. Well, I remain excited, but the truly special moment is about to come, because once the CO2 is filtered out of the air, see, look at my skin there. We are now flying back to the greenhouse with the drone. And there, we're going to see whether the value is truly changed. Hopefully, it's technically possible once the CO2 is entering the greenhouse and the greenhouse is supplied with it. The values are changing, and as I said, it takes a while until the CO2 reaches the greenhouse. It indeed is increasing. It has come. For the first time all around the world, CO2 has been supplied to a customer. Warm congratulations once more to our bold, innovative founders of Climeworks, Jan and Christoph. I don't know you any different. You're not very emotional on stage, but still, Christoph, what does that mean to you now? Just two things are passing through my head. First of all, thank you so much for the flowers. Jan and I typically don't know how to handle flowers. We know how to handle critiques. In the first phase where we founded Climeworks, no one really believed us. So we truly had to be strong. Well, that's just a feedback. But the second thing that I was thinking of is that we started together and we built up a team of 55 co-workers. We were the founders, but the fact that it now works is thanks to 53 other people. And if this is possible, I would like to ask all the Climeworkers up on stage, please. Also important for you if you have any questions. And another comment to the ETH of Zurich. Well, in the past, we've probably trained so many more CO2 filterers than anybody else. We've trained more people that know how to actually use this technology than anybody else in the world. Well, I don't want to push myself ahead, but it's such a beautiful final picture, or should I rather say an initial picture of this project. Well, no speech is as convincing as when you truly see the facts in front of your own eyes. And we hereby would like to invite you to walk around the facility and back. I'm going to share some facts and figures with you. At 4:50 p.m., the first facility is commissioned. So don't wait too long. At 4:50 p.m., please be on time in small groups of 18 people. Let's gather in front of the greenhouse for this next quick excursion. Every 10 minutes there will be a new group until 6:10 p.m. It's very important that we're on point, that we are really on time to take off, and Greenie, the food truck that is there, well, that's also part of the complementary idea of Climeworks, presenting you cucumbers and tomatoes of the greenhouse of the Maya brothers that you may enjoy during the aperitif. So from 6 o'clock p.m. there shall also be a shuttle to the Vatican train station. The press is kindly asked to talk to Julio Friedman and to meet him in the press office. They have the privilege of asking him some questions. I am sure that it's a very special opportunity. So there is nothing left to say for me but to wish you a very inspiring, wonderful, beautiful afternoon. And thank you very, very much for your interest, ladies and gentlemen.